Hello and welcome to Executive Decision, where every week we go head-to-head with business leaders, economic policy makers on the state of the Indian economy, the risks and the challenges. Very happy to have with us Rathin Roy, who is the head of the NIPFP, the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, which is an independent think tank backed by the government, and who was until recently a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Rathin, welcome to the show. Great to have you. Now, Rathin, we are taping this on the day when the RBI has further downward revised its growth projection for this country. It is down now to 5% is what they are saying it's going to be for this year. So the numbers look grim, as they have been for some time. And we had a conversation back in May about this as well. But the fundamental problem seems to be, Rathin, that we're still squabbling over the nature of the malaise. Is this something temporary or cyclical, as you economists call it, or is it something much more deeper or structural? Now, as I understand it, your view has been that this is not a temporary blip. This is something much deeper. Am I correct?
The India growth story is facing a malaise which is structural in nature. This particular slowdown is reflective of that. The structural nature of the malaise that the growth story faces may not be the proximate cause for this slowdown, but it certainly contributed to it, but it doesn't matter, because as long as you get rid of that malaise, or don't get rid of that malaise, you will keep having issues with the growth rate.
And do you feel that, and this seems to be a fundamental problem, do you feel that the government is in charge of what's happening? Do they have a grip on what's going on?
An economic slowdown, Srinivas, is more than government. You need producers, consumers, international players, all the people who are involved in the economy to take a view regarding what they are doing and to want to be and be able to do it better. Consumers need to consume more. That means affordable prices. Producers need a good business environment. Investors need confidence.
Sure.
And what the state does is tries and fosters. It does three things, really. It tries to foster such an environment. If there's a shock to the environment, it tries its best to deal with that, and it tries not to become the cause of shocks. And to that extent, I think the government cannot ever be in control of a slowdown of this depth, but it can certainly take steps to ameliorate it and do things to try and come out of it, and I think it has done some things.
Okay. But is it in control, though, of this particular slowdown?
No, only centrally planned governments can be in control or not in control of a slowdown. If the government was in full control of the slowdown, we wouldn't have a slowdown.
Right.
So what the government is in control of is, I think it's, I hope, the set of actions it needs to take, not to make the slowdown worse. I think that is happening. Some actions that could possibly help in the short term. And then we come, of course, to the medium term. And there, I'm afraid, I've yet to see the kind of structural actions from this government, or for that matter, for any government over the last 20 years, that need to be put in place.
Okay, because one view is that the government is floundering, that they're not exactly in control of what is happening. They're not exactly fully even understanding what is happening. And the perception is, at least one argument is, that they are treating this as a temporary glitch. The sort of steps that they have taken are not addressing the real problem, which is that there's a problem of demand. People are simply not buying, people are simply not spending, and that's actually making things worse.
Well, there are initiatives this government has taken over the past 2 years to address the demand problem, and my only sort of plea to government would be that it take control of those initiatives and make sure that they go up to scale, and the two important ones are doubling farmers' income and affordable housing.
Okay.
Government really needs to make sure that these things happen at a better scale than they've been happening in the past. So they put the building blocks in place.
But then why, despite that, is there a huge problem of demand?
There is a problem of demand, as I said in my May interview, because the things that used to power the Indian economy are now not powering the Indian economy to the same extent as they were earlier. The consumption of the top 150 million. Therefore, we need to broad-base consumption, and that will take time.
Okay.
So what the government, what all economic agents, government, business need to do is say, okay, so how do we make sure that 75% of our growth going forward, at least, comes from stuff that people earning the minimum wage consume, and they're able to go to the market and buy it. Nutritious meal, affordable textiles, affordable housing, health and education.
Right.
So we need a granular view of these. And each of them things are different. For example, in textiles, demand is there. But it's all going away to Bangladesh and Vietnam because our textile factories are unable to locate where we have a wage advantage, which is northern and eastern India. So we need the government and stakeholders to try and unlock that problem.
But these are all, Rathin, very deep-seated problems.
Yes.
These are questions that we've been grappling with for ages about what kind of an economy are we? Are we an export-driven economy? Are we a consumption-driven economy? So fixing them will take time.
Yeah.
But we are at the moment in a fairly worrying position. So do you think that at least for the moment that growth will continue to fall, we will continue to spiral? Or as some are suggesting that we have sort of bottomed out and things will start picking up from here. Is there any evidence of that at all?
Look, there is no domain expertise that can tell you whether an economy has bottomed out or not, except that the lower the growth rate falls, the more probable it is that it will bottom out.
Right.
Right.
So it's just common sense.
At 4.5%, it's more likely it has bottomed out than at 5.5%.
Right.
But however, I think the more productive question to ask is this. In my view, this economy, despite its supply-side constraints, should be able to grow at least 6%.
Okay.
Anything less than that is not helpful or healthy, and therefore we have to ameliorate it. To ameliorate it, we need to increase demand and we need to broad-base demand.
Okay.
That will take time. So once we decide to broad-base demand and start scaling up in the sectors I'm speaking of, there are short-term measures you can take to boost, investor confidence and consumer confidence, improve liquidity, which will have a temporary positive impact on growth. It's much like giving a patient steroids.
Right.
But if in an 18-month to 2 year to 2.5 year max window, those structural steps don't kick in, then what you will end up with is you'll be back in the same situation of low growth, but now with high inflation. And you don't want that. You don't want stagflation. So once you see those structural steps being taken, you will be able to argue that the Indian economy now has a more robust demand base going forward. That itself will improve domestic confidence, and then you can do things with monetary policy, credit policy, liquidity to give some short-term boosts, which will help that process along.
But at the moment, though, what is the government really doing to boost demand? Because you mentioned doubling farmers' income, which frankly there's not been much evidence of. There was the attempt to do PM Kisan, which is a sort of cash handout to farmers. So there's that. But beyond that, the only big announcement has been to cut corporate taxes, which frankly, at least at the moment, hasn't produced any big result.
No. I do not think that cutting corporate taxes would have had an immediate positive short-term impact. I think the idea there was it's more of a improving the business environment thing, boosting business confidence thing, because corporates will only use the additional revenue they get from taxes to invest if they're comfortable that they have liquidity, their balance sheets are good, and that confidence is not there. So if these tax cuts increase that confidence, then their appetite for investment going forward would be positive. So that's a very good example of what I said of a sort of short-term measure that lays the base for a long-term structural measure. But you're right, I do not see evidence that the long-term structural measures are being contemplated at scale. Otherwise, I probably would have heard something. But to my knowledge, they are not yet.
Okay. Now, P. Chidambaram, former finance minister, he says that this is a man-made disaster. And this is his language. He's saying that the government is clueless. They're unable to look for the obvious clues because they're being stubborn and mulish in defending their catastrophic mistakes like demonetization, flawed GST, tax terrorism, regulatory overkill, protectionism, and the centralized control of decision-making in the PMO.
I wouldn't know much. You'll have to ask him.
No, you're being diplomatic. You've been in the system. You've been part of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. But leaving aside the political overtones of what he's saying, would you concede that somewhere along the line, steps like demonetization and perhaps the imperfect implementation of the GST have also contributed to where we are?
Well, demonetization, I do not know. Let me put it this way. I have seen no empirical evidence. I've heard anecdotal claims that directly link demonetization to this recession happening 2 years from demonetization. Except a paper by Geeta Gopinath and Prachi Mishra, which focuses on the damage done to SMEs. But we can see from
that
the
did
slowdown,
show growth taking a hit, though,
because of the damage done to that
the small and medium enterprises.
sector. But this slowdown would not be this acute if it was just about SMEs, right? If it's a demand-side slowdown, it's not about a supply-side problem.
Sure.
And therefore, that cannot be the proximate reason for the slowdown. GST, I think there were two bureaucratic errors made. I do not blame the politicians at all. One was, which was also Congress, and actually every state government in power. They all wanted the GST to be revenue neutral, and they all wanted the GST rates to be as low as possible. In fact, the indirect tax burden in this country was very high before GST. And therefore, you could not have this cake and eat it too. And so collectively, politically, they went for a system that is not revenue neutral, and the consequences of that are unfolding now.
Okay.
The states, in addition,
Yes.
wanted to add on a cess so that taxes, their alleged tax losses or putative tax losses would be compensated.
Sure.
And when that cess does not work, then everybody is broke. Faulty implementation is a fact of life in India. So my only complaint there, and I have some sympathy for the bureaucracy. You see, if I'm sitting and writing a file saying GST should be implemented in this good fashion, you can't say, but knowing our government, 30% of it is likely to fail. You can't actually say that on file.
Right.
If you're smart, you'll prepare for it and do something about it. But I'm afraid that did not happen, and the expectation was it would be a flawlessly implemented GST. It was clearly not. It's a combination of political desire to have the cake and eat it too on part of all political parties.
Right. Has
Revenue
contributed
neutral
to.
and low rate. Not going to happen, boss. And it's not happening.
It isn't, yeah. But let me ask you this, Rathin, because the sort of perception is that this government is not being well advised when it comes to economic matters. And that's one of the reasons why their responses, while perhaps well-meaning, is not having the desired effect. And you've seen a bunch of people who could be seen as unquote independent economic advisors leave for various reasons. Is that a problem?
The government, all governments choose their advisors. The government has, as far as I know, a chief economic advisor in place, which it has chosen. The government has a vice chairman of Niti Aayog who's an economist. The government has a full-blown economic advisory council, many of whom I interact with and respect hugely.
You were on that council?
Yeah. But
for a stint?
They have, I was there for the first 2 years. It's a 2-year appointment, and now you have others. So they're available to government for advice. So the government is not short of people internally advising.
No, but the perception is that they only would like to listen to advice from those that they agree with, that anybody who takes a critical or a dissenting view is not encouraged.
How would I judge whether that is true or not?
You left the council.
I was, my term ended.
Your term ended. That wasn't because of the fact that you were independent-minded and you had your own views? Or were often at times critical of the government?
How would I know?
Okay. Well, I mean, people
You'll have
hear
to
or
ask
know these
people
things.
in government who take such views. That is clearly not my view.
Okay. So you're saying that that may not necessarily be the case, but at the same time, what you're saying is that you do see them make some steps which are perhaps in the nature of short-term interventions, but anything which is suggesting a longer, or even a medium or a longer-term intervention is something that is still wanting.
Yes.
But let me ask you this, though, that if there is this problem of consumption, especially at the bottom end of the economy, the commonly offered advice is that the government needs to spend more, it needs to put money in the hands of people. But can it afford to do that, given that tax collections are coming down, revenue is drying up? Should it firstly even be doing that?
Well,
And can it afford to?
the only way you could actually significantly increase fiscal expenditure, which also has costs, is not by increasing central government expenditure. So notionally, government could borrow more and give it to the states, because the states are at the cutting edge of spending. And if the states spent more, then possibly would alleviate the recession. But then the question comes, would you give it to all states equally? Would you give it to more to some states where a counter, the demand counter would be more effective? And these are difficult political questions in a federal economy. So I do not think there's much fiscal headroom
Okay.
for the government to play with. Also because you see the government's announced fiscal deficit is, we have to face it. And I'm the most conservative on this. I'm more conservative than the Honorable Controller and Auditor General. I believe it is 1% more than the number stated in the budget. And I've written about this.
You think it's 1% more than the fact
But
that
you know,
the
the
number the
CAG
government has
thinks-
claimed.
the
So you're
CAG
saying it
thinks-
actually is worse than
No, I'm saying the CAG thinks it's 2.5% more.
Right.
I'm saying I only think it's 1% more. I think the CAG
Okay.
is an overestimate.
Okay.
But 1% is a lot.
Yes.
That means that the government of India is already borrowing about 4.5%, 4.4% of GDP. If it further increases, and 72% of that is going for consumption expenditure. Basically, government's revenue receipts do not pay for their what they call revenue or consumption expenditure. It's going to pay interest on debt, subsidies, government salaries,
Sure.
etc., etc. And it's not, the government of India does not hire too many teachers or doctors. So that is out. That is the state governments. So essentially, if the government increases its borrowing, and what is it going to spend on? It will have to put that money in the state's hands, in which case you might as well give the money to the states.
Right.
But then the general government fiscal deficit would go up to a point where I would be very worried if the money was not well spent,
Right.
that it would become inflationary. So I would need assurance that this money would be well spent, and I have very little evidence for the last 40 years
That the money is actually well
that
spent.
government of India puts out there is well spent. So the last option you have is to take the money and directly transfer it to people.
Right.
That's a laudable objective, but I do not quite see how it can be achieved in concrete. I have not seen a concrete execution plan for it. I'm an economist.
As far as the actual growth numbers are concerned, where do you stand on the argument, the Arvind Subramanian argument, that actually the numbers are far worse, that you need to at least shave off a percentage and a half of the official
I've
figure?
written about it. I don't agree with it.
As far as the actual growth numbers are concerned, where do you stand on the argument, the Arvind Subramanian argument, that actually the numbers are far worse, that you need to at least shave off a percentage and a half of the official
I've
figure?
written about it. I don't agree with him.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think you, in fact, the Economic Advisory Council has defended the numbers and said the
I
data
independently
is
wrote
credible.
on that as well. And I do not agree with him. My arguments, because the AC's arguments, I don't actually agree with all of them. Having said that, he did put out a paper in Nimrana, which is a little more plausible. And there is some reason to perhaps believe that we may be misstating growth in terms of its composition. Some sectors may be doing worse than reported, but I don't think in the wash there is a significant difference.
Okay, so you're saying it's broadly credible. But overall, though, aren't you concerned that there is a problem with this government and its handling of official data, economic data, that there are questions over whether the data is, I'm not necessarily talking of GDP, but otherwise, is genuine or not? You often hear of reports which are uncomfortable to the government being suppressed, then they come out through the form of newspaper leaks, which has questioned overall India's economic data statistical system.
I think that the entire business of releasing data, or even the normal day-to-day business of asking that data that government puts out be validated and verified, the communication of that process has been severely and badly mismanaged over the past 2 years. I think it's a storm in a teacup. I have every confidence in Indian data. But I think that it shows a certain degree of administrative ineptitude on the part of the authorities responsible for both validating these statistics and putting them in the public domain. That we have repeated controversies over the timing, the nature of release, and allegations of suppression of data. It is not a healthy business for a country like India, which is one of the few countries in the world at our levels of income that was justifiably proud of having a system that was reasonably transparent.
Right.
And therefore, I think it is incumbent upon government now to announce a calendar of when they are going to release surveys that are being undertaken currently, the dates for those, and in case those are not released, to provide an honest and transparent answer, not just there were questions.
Okay.
We need a little more detail now, because I think a lot of damage has been done by the pusillanimous and I think incompetent handling of the data release and accountability process. I and most, I think, people in the professional community feel very strongly about this. It's just silly.
Yeah.
It's an own goal. They need to grow up a little bit and do this professionally. Everybody does it.
Well, let's hope so, but I won't be holding my breath. In conclusion, Rathin, because we're out of time, if you were to boil it down to some television-sized nuggets of advice that you think the government should be doing straight off the bat to try and help with this crisis, what would that be?
Be honest about the fiscal situation, release a 3-year medium-term expenditure framework. I commit to do that in 3 months if government is interested for them. number one. Number two,
Once
announce
again, just to repeat that, be honest about
the fiscal situation.
fiscal situation. Okay.
And release a
commit-
medium-term fiscal framework that shows you where we are
Okay.
and where we are going to go in the next 3 years.
And which you're saying you're happy to, you're offering your services
Yes,
to do that.
India is one of the only major countries in the world that does not have a 3-year medium-term expenditure framework. It is costing us very dear at this time when we desperately need strategy.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, identify the ways in which monetary and credit policy can be improved. Announce what you're going to do in a calendar over the year rather than say something in November and then say something in December and say something in January.
Okay.
Keep the budget conservative, keep it to fiscal grounds, and announce only in the budget what budgets are normally supposed to announce instead of general policy pronouncements. Take an honest view on 3 important things that need to improve in the next year. Logistics, and if they're not going to improve, say so that people know what to expect.
Okay.
Credit and liquidity. There are hundreds of other things that could be done, but those
these
would
are
involve
immediately
things like
off
white
the bat.
papers, which I don't think this government is inclined to produce. And therefore, if these 3 or 4 basic things were done, the core there is we need a far more transparent, forward guidance giving system of communication on economic policy and economic decision making that has hitherto been the case in the Republic of India across administrations.
Right.
And if this government can do that, it will be doing the country a great service.
Okay. Well, let's hope for the best. Rathin Roy, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.